Hey, good morning, everybody. I am so happy to be here with you all today. My name is Dan. I'm the pastor here in United. I am crazy excited about all this energy that's happening this morning. We've got all these community partners out in the lobby. It's so cool getting to see the ways in which our church is choosing to just partner and help create these opportunities to serve and to help the people of our greater community within Chambersburg and Shippensburg. It's just such a great thing. Does anyone in the room here have siblings? Anyone just like me with siblings, right? Siblings are kind of a funny thing, right? Because you end up with this friend that you're stuck with, but you also end up with someone that might be an enemy that you're stuck with. It kind of seems to go in and out of those things. There are days where you love having someone that you can do stuff with. There's other days where you maybe don't love that so much. And I think all of us at some point in time play that game that kind of bridges the gap of that. The whole, I'm not touching you, and you get your finger just like inches from them, right? Sometimes there are those long car trips where you create this fake barrier between you. You stay on your side of the line. This is my side of the line, you stay. And then without fail, you creep to the middle of that line, lean over the line a little bit. For me, I remember it always escalated to the, I'm not hitting you. In fact, while I was thinking about this, I found some footage of my sister and I at play. Take a look at this. That's exactly how it would go down for my sister and I. I remember it going just like that. I do think it's kind of funny. I remember when I first became a believer, and the other Christian kids have found out that I watched The Simpsons and I was some sort of delinquent, and now I'm using it in a church service. So I expect some comments and some notes. It's okay. Anyway, I remember an instance in particular where I was doing the, I'm not hitting you thing, and she either intentionally shifted her weight or whatever, and I just decked her straight in the face and got grounded for a while. See, the whole point of that whole game that we played was to get as close as you possibly could, but don't actually touch them. Get as close as you could, but don't touch them, because when you touched them, that's when you got in trouble. So we played this game where we just kept risking it and risking it and risking it, hoping that we would win, right? I think we play this game with God. I think we play this game in our day-to-day lives with God, because just like that opening song we kicked the morning off with, we like to ask the question, how bad can I be? How bad can I be? How close to sin can I get without sinning? How close to the line can I get and still be okay with God? We like to frame the picture of our relationship with God with whether or not we have to put in something. We like to ask the question, how little can I put in and still be okay? What parts of my life can I hang on to? What can I keep for myself, and what parts do I need to give up? See, I think a lot of the things that we do in our day-to-day lives play into this. I think so many of us walk through life doing a number of things. We will try and find the cheapest deal, right, on almost everything. Because I think every single one of us feels that tension of the world, right? We feel this tension that there's never quite enough. It doesn't matter how much money you make. It doesn't matter what you do. It always feels like you could use a little bit more. So we're always hunting for the cheapest thing. I hate going to Walmart. I hate it. It's always a terrible experience for me, but I do it because it's the cheapest prices around. Some of you do it because I see you there. I know that we do that. In fact, the whole pick up grocery thing that they do now, I love it because you get the cheap prices without the experience. I think so often, though, we go through life with this mentality. We were always looking for the next deal. We'll cut coupons. We'll show up at the crack of dawn, actually before so, on Black Friday in order to get through that door first to be able to get a deal. We try and find the cheapest thing. Sometimes this means buying crappy knockoffs of something that we want. This also transfers to other parts of our life. It's not just related to money. We want to receive something without putting in the work, without giving the cost. Everybody wants to have that superhero physique, right? But nobody wants to go on the diet. Nobody wants to spend the hours and hours at the gym that it requires. Why do you think there's so many absurd exercise equipments being sold? You've got those diodes that you put on your body that shock you into being in shape while you sit and watch TV, hoping that maybe that's the key to this thing. You've got diet pills. You have all of these things that we want the results, but we don't want to put in the work. We don't want the cost that comes with that. See, I think this thought process bleeds over into our relationship with God all over the place. We like the idea of following him. We do. We love the benefits that we see when we come into a relationship with him, the things that we receive. But we don't necessarily like the idea that it may cost something of us. We don't like the idea that we need to give certain things up. We don't like the idea that he wants all of us. Think of some of the things that this impacts, some of the costs involved. Time. Relationship takes time. And the cost of our time, the cost of our attention in today's world is a challenge. For many of us, it might feel like it's too expensive to give time for a relationship with God. For some of us, it's money. For some of us, we're trying to seek out this mission and following God, and he starts asking things of us. Maybe he asks us to take a job that we're not getting paid as much as we think we deserve so that we can be positioned to love other people, so that we can be positioned to share Jesus with other people, so that we can live out the gospel. Sometimes God will call us to give more than we think we're capable of because it'll transform someone's life. But oftentimes that cost might feel like it's a little too much for us. Sometimes, and I think this one's actually harder for the rest of us, sometimes it means giving up some of the things that we enjoy, right? Sometimes there's things in our life that we enjoy that might not be in line with what God really wants for us. And for us, that is an amazing cost to be willing to give that thing up. Sometimes it's some pet sin. Sometimes it's just some bad habit. Whatever it is, we enjoy them. We wouldn't have a struggle with sin if we didn't enjoy it, at least in those moments. We might feel guilty afterwards, but for us, the idea of giving that up completely is sometimes a challenge. There are a ton of ways where this plays out in our lives. It's all over the place. And we need to learn that there is a cost involved with following Jesus. And today, we are focusing on the reality that a healthy and vibrant relationship with Jesus is not based off of half measures. A relationship with Jesus is based off of being all in. Are you all in, or have you been holding back? Because Jesus wants us to be all in, just as he went in all in for us. We are in the final week of this series, Command C. And this series has been an amazing challenge, I think, for us. I know for me, I have been walking through week by week and just getting punched in the gut every week about things that God wants me to work on in my life. But we have been looking at all of these ways that we can copy Jesus. We can imitate Jesus every week of this series. We've taken a couple different angles on this. We've looked at some direct commands from Jesus, like love one another as I've loved you. And that week we talked about dying to ourselves, making sure we put other people before ourselves. We've looked at another direct command of love your enemy. We just looked at that last week. And we just have this picture of loving the people that are hard to love because Jesus loved us when we were the ones that were hard to love. And then we've also looked at another kind of take on this. We've looked at some principles that we see through interactions with Jesus where Jesus proclaims the things that he thinks are important. A few weeks ago, we looked at the story of Martha and Mary, and we looked at the importance of Jesus being the central focus of our lives, and how when that is the case, the way in which we love other people is completely transformed because our focus is on him and we can love through him instead of out of our own comparisons and our own issues. Well, today's going to be similar to that week in the sense that we're going to be looking at an interaction with Jesus and being able to understand through this interaction the thing that Jesus says is important, the thing that he wants us to copy. Today we're actually looking at another story that applies to Mary. Again, the one that we saw from the story of Martha and Mary. And we're going to be looking at the important thing to imitate being that there are no half measures in loving Jesus. That there's a cost involved in a relationship with him, and we need to be all in. We need to be all in our relationships with Jesus. If you've got your Bibles, go ahead and turn with me. We're going to be looking at Mark 14 here this morning, starting in verse 3. So Mark 14, the verses should be up on the screen here as well. But let's go ahead and dive into that. Mark 14, verse 3 says, "And while he was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, as he was reclining at the table, a woman came with an alabaster flask of ointment of pure nard, very costly. And she broke the flask and poured it over his head. There were some who said to themselves indignantly, 'Why was the ointment wasted like that? For this ointment could have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor.' And they scolded her. But Jesus said, 'Leave her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. For you always have the poor with you, and whenever you want, you can do for them, but you will not always have me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand for burial. And truly I say to you, wherever the gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in memory of her.'" So let's look at the background of what we just read here, and then we're going to dive in and unpack what that whole thing said. So this story occurs just a few days before Jesus is crucified. This is a few days before the Last Supper, a few days before he's arrested, and he has come into Jerusalem in the triumphal entry. He's been celebrated as this triumphant king, this hero, this conqueror who is going to come and deliver the people and rescue them from the oppression that they're dealing with. He's teaching at the temple throughout this week and going through all of these things, and while this is happening, he's creating a stir. Particularly with all the Jewish leaders. They're starting to plot, and they're starting to try and figure out, how can we get rid of this guy? Because he is stepping on our toes, and we do not like this. So in the midst of all of this tension and all of this anticipation, you have this story that seems to shift tone a little bit. You have this story that slows down. And we see this picture then of Jesus and the disciples and a woman who is actually, in John's gospel, said to be Mary, the sister of Martha. So the same story paralleled in John tells us this is Mary. And they're together in this room. In Mark 14:3 it says, "While he was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, as he was reclining at the table, a woman came with an alabaster flask of ointment and pure nard, very costly. And she broke the flask and poured it over his head." So first off, these guys are at the house of Simon the leper. And there's some speculation on who this is specifically, but Simon the leper is actually probably this guy that Jesus healed of leprosy earlier in Mark 1. If that's the case, wouldn't it kind of suck to still be called Simon the leper, right? Leprosy was this thing that when you had leprosy, you were an outcast. You weren't allowed to interact in normal society. Everyone had to give you space. And Jesus comes along, heals him, and completely transforms his world. Everything changes, and everyone's still calling him Simon the leper, even to this day. That would be kind of challenging to interact with, I think. But they're at Simon's house, and they're all reclining at the table. That's the way everyone sat at tables then. They didn't have the chairs we do. They would lay and eat. It sounds kind of nice, actually, especially if you're lazy. But anyway, they would sit at the table and they're eating, and this woman comes in who John says is Mary, and she dumps this alabaster jar onto Jesus of this oil. In verse 4 it says, "There were some who said to themselves, 'Why was this ointment wasted like that? For the ointment could have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor.' And they scolded her. So the disciples, seeing this going on, start to murmur under their breath. They start to say, 'Man, what a waste. What a waste. She's dumping this on their head.'" And I think on his head. And honestly, I think most of us would probably say the same if we understood what was happening here. See, 300 denarii, what this was worth, is the equivalent of a full year's wages. So imagine with me, someone walks in the room and they have this jar of perfume and oil that is the amount that you would make in an entire year, and they just start dumping it on someone. I think most of us would probably go, whoa, pump the brakes here. Why don't you slow down a little bit so that we can maybe figure something else out for this thing? It seems like there might be better uses. In fact, the disciples see this, and they say the reason they give for why she should not do this is we could take care of the poor. We could take care of the poor. I think most of the disciples here are probably well-meaning. I say most because when John tells the story, he says that Judas says this, and he's saying it because he wants the money. He wants to take it. He wants his hands on it because he would steal it, and things would be good for him. But I think most of the disciples are probably meaning well here. Verse 6, but Jesus says to them, leave her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. For you always have the poor with you, and whenever you want, you can do for them. But you will not always have me. So Jesus tells the disciples, look, you might be well-meaning here and taking care of the poor, but the poor are always going to be here. I'm not. You're going to have a very limited number of experiences left with me. Be with me. She's doing the right thing here. There are less opportunities to worship me in person than you expect. Verse 8, she has done what she could. She has anointed my body before the burial, and truly I say to you, wherever the gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in memory of her. What Jesus says here is Mary understands what I've been saying. He infers by saying she's preparing my body for death that she gets it. In fact, most of the disciples didn't. Most of the disciples have been listening to Jesus, and he's been teaching them, and they understand they may be at the place where they believe he's the Son of God, but most of them don't quite grasp what is about to happen. Jesus is trying to tell them and trying to convey this, and they're just not quite getting it. But he's about to die, and Mary seems to get it. She understands he is who he says he is, and he's going to do what he said he's going to do. And this act of worship that she does with oil was this recognition of what was about to come. And Mary is all in. A full year's wages. Man, imagine what you could do with that. And she's all in. This is what she gives. It's interesting to me that Mary understands to a greater degree than these apostles who've been following Jesus, especially in the context of their society, because in that world, women were second-class citizens. And here, a woman seems to be grasping the meaning more than all these guys who have been following around. They're about half lost. But here's the point of the story. Here's the way it ties to what we're talking about here this morning and what Jesus wants us to learn to imitate, the thing that we should love. Jesus wants us to be all in our relationship with him. There is this amazing cost that comes with following Jesus and worshiping him, and God does not want our leftovers. God does not want the times where we can squeeze him into our schedule. He wants us. He wants all of us. He wants every aspect of our lives, everything that we are, to exist within him. He wants all of our affections. And from the viewpoint of our world, that's expensive. We like to compartmentalize our lives. We like to be this person here and this person here. We like to give as much as we can here, but hold on to this to ourselves. And what Jesus is saying is, no, I want all of it. I want all of it. And that's how we learn to copy what he wants here, to be all in. So how do we begin to walk this out? How do we learn to imitate what Jesus wants us to imitate here? How do we go all in loving him in our relationships with him? Well, first and foremost, I think we need to begin to recognize there are no half measures. That song that we opened up the morning with, how bad can I be, is the question we ask. How close to the line can I get? How much can I almost sin before it becomes an issue? See, I think for all of us in our lives, that tends to be the question we ask instead of how should I be responding to this amazing sacrifice that Jesus made on the cross for my sake. We tend to ask the opposite of, man, how much can I get away with? How much am I okay doing? There's a pastor and theologian who lived during World War II named Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who actually spoke out against the Nazis in Germany and was eventually put in prison for that, and eventually he died through this whole process. But he wrote a book called Cost of Discipleship. And in this book, he talks about the great cost of Jesus' sacrifice and how our response should not be a cheap response. Listen to what he says in the book, in Cost of Discipleship. He says, such grace, talking of the sacrifice of Jesus, and when we receive that, the life we gain. He says, such grace is costly because it calls us to follow. And it's grace because he calls us to follow Jesus. It's costly because it costs a man his life. And it's grace because it gives a man the only true life. It's costly because it condemns sin, and grace because it justifies the sinner. Above all, it's costly because it cost God the Son, the life of his Son. You were bought with a great price. What has cost God much cannot be cheap for us. Above all, it is grace, because God did not reckon his Son too dear a price to pay for our life, but delivered him up for us. This picture of this amazing sacrifice and the great cost that it cost God for our sakes should mean that we can't respond cheaply. I think one of the big hurdles we have when we're interacting with that, one of the big hurdles that we have to wrestle through when we're trying to respond to the grace of Jesus, is we need to learn to ignore the murmurings of the people around us. The disciples in this place, even though they may have been well-intentioned, are murmuring, "What a waste. What a waste." How many people are murmuring in your life, maybe well-intentioned, that are saying, "What a waste"? They look at what it costs to follow Jesus. They look at the way we try and live our lives. They look at the way we try and worship Jesus in all that we do, and they look at that and they say, could be a better use of your time. What a waste. It's funny because I think that the conversation ties so much into our society, so much into the world around us. In fact, I wish I had more time this morning because I would love to dive into all of the discussion of philosophy and all of these arguments that go back and forth when it comes to this conversation. But I find it ironic that the secular world looks at the Christian life and goes, "What a waste. Look at all that time you're wasting in church and spending time reading a Bible and spending time trying to do all these things. Look at all the fun things you're missing out on because you're following some dumb rules. Look at all the stuff you do, all because you believe in a fairy tale. What a waste." That's the common message that we hear in the world around us. And I think I have to ask that question, which life is really wasted? Which life is really wasted? The one who's connected to the God of the universe through his Son, driven to love the world around us? Or is it the person who thinks that this is all there is, so let's live it up before the clock hits zero? Mind you, don't get me wrong. There is definitely people outside of God who find meaning in life and live good, meaningful lives. But it's only a temporary thing. It's only this temporary thing because they're missing the opportunity for greater life that comes in a relationship with Jesus, for life that we are all designed to function in, true and abundant life. The thing that Jesus wants us to imitate in this passage is to be completely in our relationship with him. And some of that means we need to learn to ignore the murmurings that are pointing us away from who Jesus is. Jesus wants us to not give these half measures, to not only give parts of ourselves. He wants us to give all of ourselves to him, to worship him with everything that we are, to love him with everything that we have, to serve him with all that we are. How are you living your life? Are you all in? Are you seeking to throw all your cards on the table with Jesus? Or are you giving him just parts of yourself? Are you hanging on to these different pieces of your life because you're not ready to give them up, because they feel too costly, they feel too expensive? Man, this can be an uncomfortable question to ask. It really can. But the challenge I think every one of us has to face this morning is, am I hanging on to something? What am I holding back from God that he wants from me? What are you holding back in your relationship with Jesus? As we start to look inward, sometimes it can be a little bit painful because we start to see, man, I'm being a different person over here than I am over here because I'm hanging on to this thing instead of going all in. Don't go through this life trying to find the cheap way out. Give everything that you are to Jesus and allow God to transform you, to make you look more like him, to experience real life, to experience full life, to love other people fully, to live the life that you were designed to live. This is what comes when we go all in with Jesus, when we allow him to have everything that we are. I tell you what, this series has been a challenging one for me. It's been a hard one because I've had to look at so many of these things in my life, and the Holy Spirit's there convicting me of all of this stuff that I've been wrestling with. Loving people that are hard to love, loving other people more than I love myself, making Jesus the sole focus of my life, allowing him to infiltrate everything that I am so that I give him everything that I am. Man, I hope this entire series for you has not just been a nice conversation that we've had in February, but it's been something that God has used to help move you closer to him so that you can experience the life that he wants for you. This morning, as we wrap things up, I want you to once again ask that question: what am I holding back? What is the thing I'm hanging on to and not giving up to Jesus? Maybe the thing you're holding back is a relationship in the first place. That was a huge hurdle for me when I first became a believer. In fact, I would hear stories of Jesus. I believed the things that were being told to me were true, but I didn't want to submit. I didn't want to jump in because I saw that it was going to change my life, and I wasn't sure if I was going to like that. But here's the incredible thing. When you make the decision to be all in, when you choose to accept that you cannot do it on your own, the only way to find relationship with God, the only way to find real life is through the forgiveness that Jesus offers because of his death on the cross. When you choose to jump all in and follow him, it transforms your life. It changes your world. Because for the first time, you're going to recognize what it means to truly live, to recognize what abundant life is. If this is where you find yourself this morning, don't hold back. Don't wait. Jump in. Don't hang on to pieces. Don't try and think that, oh man, I think I can manage. Allow Jesus to transform your life. Choose to follow him. If there's something you're wrestling with this morning, whether it's this idea of following Jesus, whether it's any of these other things we have worked through, whether it's this idea of the cost that's involved with following Jesus, I want you to come talk to me. Have a conversation. Whether you scan that QR code and fill out the thing, whether you shoot me an email, whether you just talk to me at the end of the service, I would love to sit down with you and help you figure out what is your next step in figuring this journey out. As we wrap up this service, let's remember the way in which Mary worshiped with all of her affection, all of her devotion, poured out on the feet of Jesus. We're going to sing the bridge of that song we just sang a little bit ago. And let's make this our declaration of worship to him. Let's tell him this morning that we are all in. And we want what's best for us through you, Lord. Let's stand together and sing.